welcome to Focus on B, the video series where I would typically spend about 20 or so minutes playing and talking about a game that I've got some thoughts on. But once again, and I swear this is the final time that I'm going to be making this exception of an upload, I'm once again showcasing one of my own games for about 10 or so minutes, not just playing the game itself, because as you can clearly see, there's not that much to it. Why did I make an infinite jumping mobile game type thing? Well, because I was curious as to how I could get an algorithm working to have platforms spawn indefinitely, right? With their own unique horizontal position. So I went ahead and developed this little prototype in about a day. Then I spent another day on the graphics and sound, and bada boom, bada bing, got a game. Also, no, that score is not out of center. It actually is centered. I'm just scaling the game in a weird way right now in windowed mode for recording purposes. But when you play the game full screen the way it's supposed to be, it's perfectly centered. Don't worry about that. So let's jump into the interesting thing. Well, actually, wait, hold on. Before I do that, I'm pretty sure I included this in the information on my itch page. But if you hit the S key, you swap the soundtrack. Yes, this time I've been playing a fuck ton of Jazz Jackrabbit 2, and Alexander Brendan is literally the greatest composer of our times. So what I did was, I wrote the typical 8-bit version that I wanted to write, and then I opened up Ableton again, and I basically made an arranged version, so to speak. But unlike Mega Man X Free, I didn't completely butcher it, at least I hope I didn't. Because, yeah, I've used all these different, like, instruments, these flutes, pianos, all that stuff, just to give it, like, a richer sound, and I really fucking like the way it turned out. You know, the composition itself took a bit of time to get sounding good, but I think it turned out pretty cool. So, you'll be the judge of that. You'll download the game and play it. Maybe one of these days I gotta release, like, a soundtrack or something with all of my game soundtracks. But, anyway, let's actually jump into the interesting thing now, which is the game itself, how I developed it. So, as you can see, you don't really see a lot here. That is because all of the platforms come in naturally via my code. But first, let's talk about how I handled collision, and, well, not so much collision, but more so death. This right here is the kill plane. Actually, no, wait, I'm wrong. This is the kill plane. If at any point the player, because the camera is constantly shifting upward. Now, I realize that the way I've developed this game is a little backwards, because when you have a game where you're constantly moving in one direction, you really could just have the background scroll and things moving, but you don't have to have the player actually move any higher. I could just have the platforms constantly fall. In fact, if I open up the code for my platforms, let's find it. It should be in scripts, slow plat, yes. As you can see, it doesn't move. I initially had movement going on here, like a position, it's all caps because I'm recording, but like, you know, position Y, I misspelled position because I'm a fucking, actually no. Oh, no, it won't let me... Is it misspelled? Pose it... It isn't misspelled. It doesn't work because I'm recording and I have, you know, caps lock enabled. Whatever, but the point is, though, I would typically do something like this, and then it would go down. Well, actually, it would have to be, if I wanted to go up, it would have to do that. Whatever. Point is, I would have some kind of movement. But clearly, I'm not doing that. God, it's going to be pissed at me all day, isn't it? Yeah, let's do that. There you go. But I don't need that movement, because instead what I've done is... Well, this is because I started developing the game this way. Instead, I have the camera constantly shifting upwards. Look at the scroll camera node that I have here. It's just a camera node. And as you can see, it is constantly moving up. But it's not moving by just whatever number. It's moving by these two variables, which I can alter in real time. Why do I have this set up this way? It's so that I can have these two Area 2D nodes. These two Area 2D nodes at the top and bottom of the screen allow me to detect when the player is near the top and bottom of the screen and change the speed. This way, I can have the game scroll ever so slightly faster when you're near the top and slow down just a tinge when you're at the bottom. That way the game's just a little more dynamic. And this compensate right here, I believe is for on speed up, but yeah, okay. Speed up, okay. So this is the base scroll speed, which actually, this is what changes when these timers initiate for when a certain amount of time has passed to speed the game up overall. This is the compensate. This is what I use for when the player is at the top or bottom of the screen. So essentially that's how I handle the camera, you know, moving faster or slower, and obviously this camera has its own nodes attached here, including the depth, right? And that is basically this game has Contra Syndrome, if you want to call it that, if you want to go real old school, right? Where, well, no, it's not really Contra Syndrome because that would imply that there was any terrain underneath you to begin with, which it kind of is. But it's more about like how when the camera refuses to scroll back down. Oh, you know what? I should try developing that at some point, like prototyping a camera that doesn't want to scroll back, which used to be a memory limitation back then. Nowadays, it's funny how we have to put in extra work to do things that just happened naturally back then because, you know, the systems weren't powerful enough. As for the backgrounds, typical shit, we just have our parallax layers that just don't scroll. Well, no, these ones do scroll, but only horizontally. As you can see, my auto-scroll settings right here. And what about the character? You probably noticed that the character can only move when in the air. They do not move when they're on the ground. You can't just walk. Why is that? Simple. Right here, if not is on floor, this is for the gravity, obviously, we've done this before. And then variable left, right. And then, as you can see, if left, right, and is not on the floor. You can't be on the floor if you want to move. Otherwise, it won't work. So you have to jump. Here's the jumping. Very simple. Right, let me zoom it out a little bit. There you go. You got your input, you press the button if you're on the floor, and if you're alive. I do this so that the player can't jump from the bottom of the screen when they die. They won't be able to revive themselves because at that point, the death function is in effect already, so they're screwed. But what I mean is they just won't, they won't be able to move around after they're dead, because I've always hated that with some games. Genuinely, there are commercially released games out there where even when the player is dead, you can still move around a little bit, and like even just something as small as moving the camera around like a Source game, that always just seemed kind of unprofessional to me. Whatever, I'll rant about that in some other video. Maybe I'll do a video on Portal at some point. I should do that, game's a classic. Anyway, so, this right here is our velocity Y, basically that's the jump, and speed multiplier. Why do I use a speed mult? This is so that I compensate the player's jump height for when the game speeds up, because I found through playtesting, and by that I mean like 10 minutes, that the game becomes practically impossible when it speeds up. Now, part of that is intentional because that's just classic arcade game design, but I want the player to have a chance still to play for a little longer before they have to, I guess, give up their computer to the guy next to them. I don't fucking know, like, back in the arcade era, I wasn't even alive for that. Anyway, so what happens is whenever this occurs, switch, this is the timer that causes the first change in speed. Your speed multiplier, which actually affects your jump height, it increases by 0.1, and then even faster, it goes up to 0.2, so the player can jump just a little bit higher. This right here is your charge jump, which is limited. As you can see, it detects not only if you're alive, but also if you can super jump. When you use the super jump, you can no longer use it again. As you can see what happens here, it modulates the player color to indicate the fact that, it's charging back up. And then, actually, how did I restore? Oh yeah, I use a timer. I don't think I could have done it a different way, come to think of it, but that's how I did it this time. I used a timer that is constantly running to restore the player's ability to jump extra high. It's kind of like a reload in a shooter, if that makes sense. Also, I have this little unstuck, but you know why? Because, basically, sometimes a platform would spawn inside of the player. What do you think happens? Well, the engine has no idea what to fucking do, so the player gets stuck. And so, to stop that from happening, I have this area node inside of the player, unstuck, that can only detect stuff on layer 1 and 3, that is the platforms, obviously. And then, if it notices that the player is stuck, it makes him unstuck by just going up a couple pixels. And that seems to fix it. I also have an extra landing animation, which I used a simple node right here underneath. I kind of feel like I should probably make it a little smaller. Let me try that, because it can sometimes trigger even when you're in midair. Something like that. There you go. That should be an ultimately better solution for the way to, in order to handle the landing animation, so that the game. And yes, I know there are other ways to do it, like having a move and collide argument, and then a vector 2 down to detect the bottom of the player, but the problem is that it runs every frame and it gets a little iffy. I just use this instead and it seems to work out just fine. I also play a landing sound effect. You can barely hear it. I realized when playing the game that the landing sound is actually a little annoying, so it's very low in the mix. It's still there, but it's very low in the mix. What else is there for me to show off as to how I did? We'll have these starting platforms in order for the player to not just fault it or deaf. These starting platforms only exist on layer 4, however. This is so that there's no potential clashing or fighting with other layers. It's not really necessary because the platforms that fall, they have their own behavior. And as to how I handle that, I simply have a timer right here called slow spawn, and also have a timer fast spawn. Obviously, I have a fast spawn timer so that I can spawn the platformers more quickly when the game speeds up. So as you can see right here, here's all that happens. It looks like a lot. Trust me, it's really not. This right here, this only exists to handle the score, right? It's not that big of a deal. This right here handles switching the music. So if you press the button, as you can see, it switches the music from 0 to 1, and it makes it either, because the music is constantly running. It's kind of like how Sonic games handle their boost mixes. Both versions of the track are constantly running, but only one is actually audible. Anyway, so we're going to go back over here to, there you go. So by default, slow spawn is set to 0, as you can see right here. Fast spawn is set to 0, I mean. So, because that's the default condition, everything spawns according to this spawner, as opposed to this one, right? So we get a variable, random spawn, right? We use some RNG to determine the position of the platform. Then we have another variable called slow platform, and then we instantiate that. Bada boom, we put that there. And now this right here, Y spawn. Why is this here? It's so that the platforms can be constantly moving. They can be spawning higher and higher. Otherwise, they will all spawn on the same Y level, making the game pointless, right? Well, the game's already kind of pointless, admittedly, but you get what I mean. So every single frame, because it's in process, every single frame, Y spawn is decreasing, because remember, in game engines, minus is higher, right? When you're talking about up and down. So it goes down by 1, and then multiply by fast spawn compensation. This, of course, is there for when the game speeds up. So when the game speeds up, oh, look at that, fast spawn compensation becomes 2.5. So that the platforms spawn farther apart. Otherwise, they'll all get really close together and make the platforming super awkward. And then when it comes to def, well, what do you think? I disable all the timers, I set your high score. If your score is higher than the current high score, then it sets. It's the easiest thing in the world. You're not alive anymore, so you can't jump around. I wait 6 seconds, and then we do it all over again. As you can see, you can just like copy this code essentially. It really, like, this is like a pretty entry level type Godot game, even though this is like my 7th one. But it feels good though, because I feel like I'm constantly getting, even though my games aren't getting any more complex, I feel like I'm getting better and better at figuring out how to do them. I mean, I literally did not have to look up a single thing. I did everything here based on just what I've learned about the engine, which makes me feel really good, because every time I browse through like the fucking Godot subreddit, and it's just like, how do I get out of tutorial hell? And I'm just like, oh fuck me, thank God I haven't ended up there. Tutorial hell, that what they're referring to is like, you don't actually understand how the engine works, so you're constantly looking up how to do everything instead of just knowing how to do it. And I totally get that. For the first few days of using it, I was like that. I was like, what the fuck is a position X? What the hell is a transform X? You know what I mean? But you get used to it, really. It's not really that complicated if I can figure it out, right? And I'm not a very smart person. And that's practically it when it comes to figuring out this game. It's probably my simplest game so far. Well, maybe my second simplest game. Maybe the arena shooter, the gallery shooter was even simpler. But I don't know. I'm having a good time making these. Maybe if I come up with some other thing, I'll make another one. Although, I'm no longer like actively trying to continue making games. This one happened out of nowhere. You know what I mean? I just made it. And it just like, you ever just accidentally make a video game? You know, it just happened like that. Yeah, that's pretty much going to do it for this episode of Focus on B, the video series where I would usually spend about 20 or so minutes. Although this time I only spent, well, 15 actually. That's a pretty good amount of time to talk about my own game, because I'm such a narcissist. So yeah, that's going to do it for Charge and Jump. You know, Charge and Blast? This is Charge and Hop. That's the actual name. Yeah, Charge and Hop 2025 PC.